The occupation of Crimea fired the Ukrainians in the Black Sea to eliminate the Russian danger. A year after Russian President Vladimir Putin's war against Ukraine, Russia suffered a great strategic defeat. Ukraine achieved an unexpected, great victory. The West showed a composition of determination, unity, and harmony that very few predicted. However, this is the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. As Winston Churchill calls it, the war continues without end. Both sides are not ready for negotiation. Both are preparing to start major attacks in the near future. In this relentless war, the Crimea is a key region where great attacks will occur. In January, Zelensky said that the Crimea is our land, our region, and asked its allies strong weapons to get back the strategic peninsula. The fact that Russia routinely uses the bases in the Crimea to attack the Ukrainian infrastructure is one of the phenomena that ignite the Ukrainians. And this reinforced the belief that Kiev was necessary to liberate the Crimea and to put an end to the threat of Russia. Kiev frequently reinforced with the attacks on the Crimea. The Ukrainian armed forces seem to be a good tradition. This tradition of Kiev troops is undoubtedly to organize explosions in the military airports of the Russian Federation once a week. The bold attacks of Ukraine on the peninsula are a great concern for Russia and Russian residents in the Crimea. While the Russians flee to the highway trains and ferries from the peninsula, the Russian army is desperately trying to strengthen the air and sea defense. The tradition of Ukraine on the Crimea points to the end of everything for the Russians in the Crimea and a much further beginning for Ukraine. Ukraine's unmanned aerial vehicles managed to drag Vladimir Putin to a hurry by making show of strength in the Crimean skies. The last of these attacks occurred in the Russian military airbase in Gaverdysk in Crimea. The Russian military airbase in Gaverdysk was the second largest airbase in Crimea. The mysterious Ukrainian weapon hit Russia's military airbase 240 kilometers from the Crimean front line. The local people say that the explosions are heard and seen in the Russian military airbase area in the village of Gaverdysk. According to local reports, a few explosion sounds were heard. Then a black smoke appeared on the airbase. Photos or videos and other information from the scene have not yet been announced to the public. Gaverdysk is a city-type village of Simferopol district of Crimea. With the attacks organized by the mysterious vehicles of Ukraine, the Russian military airbase in the village of Gaverdysk received another irreparable wound. It is likely that the heroes who carried out this attack will be bomb-loaded drones. When the bombs thrown from the drones hit the military airbase, huge explosions occurred and the Crimean skies surrendered to dark clouds. Russian officials have not yet made a statement about the attack. However, considering the ammunition and soldiers at the airbase, it is a strong possibility that serious casualties would occur. In addition to Gaverdysk attacks, there were very active days in Crimea this week. Recently, an explosion occurred near the Russian invaders in the Crimean Bakhchisarai, Yalta, Gurzov, and other settlements on the southern coast of the peninsula were heard. The Russian military unit on Simferopolsky Street in Bakhchisarai flew up as a result of the attack of unmanned aerial vehicle. The explosion was so strong that in many villages of Bakhchisarai district, the horrific voices of the explosions were heard. Moreover, the explosions were so violent that it was heard even on the north of Sevastopol, about 25 kilometers away from Bakhchisarai in Bakhchisarai. The Russian Federation was the engineering store of the 758th Logistics Center of the Black Sea Fleet and the 133rd Brigade of the M2 of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. This brigade in the Crimea provides the supply and logistics of the Russian 22nd Army Corps units in Ukraine. In addition, according to Russian state media, air defense systems shot down 6 drones and electronic warfare systems disabled 4. Meanwhile, Mikhailo Podolyak, one of the chief advisors of Vladimir Zelensky, denied today that Ukraine driving unmanned aerial vehicles to attack the Russian lands of Ukraine after Ukraine's official statements that the infrastructure in Russia has targeted the Western allies of Ukraine deterred Ukraine from attacking the targets in Russia to prevent the climbing of the conflict. Mr. Podilyak's statement may be reflecting Kiev's attempt to maintain denial to some extent in the light of these Western concerns. The explosions at the Crimean Russian airbase reveal a truth. This fact is Ukraine's persistent stance on receiving Crimea. Do you think Ukraine can get back Crimea? Let's examine this possibility in depth. The strategically important region in the Black Sea, which was once the jewel of the Russian Empire, has a long history, including resisting against the Nazis in the Second World War and the annexation by Vladimir Putin in 2014. In the early days of the war, President Vladimir Zelensky was cautious at first when he came to publicly express his ambitions about the coastal region. However, as the war continued and the Ukrainian troops won more and more victory on the battlefield, the stance of the Kiev leader became clearer, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video. The Crimea is Ukraine and its armed forces will take it back while Ukraine continues to take back its territory, including areas such as Kherson, which Moscow claims to belong to it. It becomes much more reasonable and military more applicable from a completely geostrategic point of view. Ukraine will have to take back important lands in places such as Zaporizhia and even Donetsk before thinking about an attack on the Crimea. However, such a push seems to be much more possible than a few months ago. A large-scale offensive accompanied by sensitive strokes targeting Russian air, land, and navy forces and the bombardment can help Putin's men from the Crimea. This harmonious attack on the peninsula will be a major blow to isolate, neutralize it, and to cause serious damage to its military infrastructure through long-range attacks. If there is no definite war success elsewhere, the liberation of the Crimea means a defeat that it cannot hide for Moscow, and it can lead to the collapse of the Russian forces in the field, and even the fall of Putin. However, for such a move, Ukraine needs long-range attack capabilities such as ATACMS missile with a 190-mile range. The West will also have to provide another equipment that can allow Ukrainians to deploy a large armored force that can enter the enemy lines without being blown up by mines or without being stranded in the trenches excavated by the Russians. But there is no consensus between Western countries to provide longer-range weapons to Ukraine. Very few believe that Russia will resort to a tactical nuclear attack, that any weapon that can be used potentially to attack by Ukraine within Russian territory may increase the risk of climbing and lead other Western countries directly to a war. As a result, a progress in the south of Ukraine may risk Russia's dominance in the Crimea. The peninsula. An illegal annexation by Russia in 2014 represents Putin's most important geopolitical success. Aside from a bargaining trump card to use the conditions for ending the war, the loss would not even be an acceptable option for him. In the last 12 months, many speculations have been made on the red lines of Russia and which actions of Ukraine and Western supporters can overcome these lines. The Crimean bridge was blown up, and the UAV attacks on the Crimean territory fired these speculation where the Russian red lines were and what could finally trigger a great retaliation. And even Putin could lead to a nuclear attack order against Ukraine. Many people are afraid that in a Russian roulette scenario, Putin's defeat, and especially the rescue of Crimea, can create a red line. And while that he could lead him to use nuclear weapons, however, thanks to the durability and mastery of Ukraine, Russian authorities resorted to nuclear sword shakes. In summary, the current situation will continue with the violence of the Ukrainian war, and even in the spring the temperature of the conflicts in the facade lines will warm the agenda. The other end of this fire line will always have Crimea. The center of the war between Ukraine and Russia is slowly shifting from the Donbass, the most violent area of ground operations, to the southern front lines of Ukraine. The spring fever continues to energize the southern regions of Ukraine. The Kinburn Peninsula, a small promontory at the mouth of the Dnipro River and the tip of Crimea, is described as having enormous strategic importance at the current stage of the war. Ukraine has stated its intention to liberate it, and an operation seems to be underway to do so. We see that Ukraine is constantly preparing for the Crimean offensive and has carried out many attacks on Crimea in recent months. However, the attack on Kinburn Spit is getting much more attention because, as we can see from the map, Kinburn Spit is seen as the most suitable region for a sea landing to Crimea. The Ukrainian General Staff has reportedly destroyed Russian artillery and MLR in the region. It is also very clear that this will open a point where the Russian army in Kherson can be moved around. The destruction of the last Russian units in Kherson will pave the way for a very comfortable ground operation. Given the location and history of the area, it makes sense to reclaim the strip of land. The sandy Kinburn Spit is the tip of a peninsula about 40 kilometers long and 4 to 12 kilometers wide, extending into the Black Sea. Kinburn dominates the entrance to the Dnipro River system, which bisects Ukraine from the north all the way to Kiev and beyond. It also controls access from the Black Sea to the important port of Mykolaiv. The Mykolaiv port is one of Ukraine's existing port, making the peninsula even more strategically important. The possession of this flat piece of land, which also serves as an alternative point of departure for Ukrainian export, allow those who control it to exercise power and thus penetrate the south and east of the Black Sea. The importance of this small area is also clearly explained in the pages of history. Since the Russians took an active interest in the region in 1737, there have been several major battles for control of the peninsula and the local area. The most notable was the Battle of Okhakov, which led to Russia's conquest of southern Ukraine, or New Russia, as Catherine the Great called it. Now tensions in Kinburn are at a new high, and the importance of the peninsula is more topical than ever. The latest Russian rocket attacks in the region put the invaders within range of the town of Okhakov, just 3 miles across the river. Over time, Ukrainian counterattacks forced the Russian troops to retreat from these areas, as well as Ukrainian pressure increases in the region. Russia is fleeing to fortified areas east of the Dnipro River. But the other day the Ukrainian armed forces cornered the Russians in Kinburn Spit, and a fierce artillery clash between the two sides began. As a result of the prolonged clashes, Ukrainian missile and artillery units destroyed a Russian artillery gun and, most importantly, a Russian at Kinburn Spit. In addition, Ukrainian artillery destroyed an ammunition depot set up by the Russian invaders in the striking Kinburn Spit operation. These strikes, which mobilized the Dnipro Islands region, further cornered the Russian forces in Kinburn and cut off the most important Russian communications routes in the Black Sea. As the invaders lost their and many other military ammunition as a result of successful shelling, they could no longer hold on to this part of the island. Ukrainian naval commandos also simultaneously supported the Ukrainian artillery operation. Even now, elite Ukrainian naval commandos are conducting reconnaissance and detection patrols on the Kinburn Spit and in various areas of the Dnipro Island region. While all these heavy blows continue to stun the Russians in Kinburn, the invaders seem reluctant to counterattack for the time being, as any Russian attempt to attack a Ukrainian beach on this peninsula would be blocked by Ukrainian artillery on the opposite bank of the Dnipro. Taking advantage of this situation, the Ukrainians are establishing a presence in Kinburn, opening a front, no matter how narrow, that can reach as far as another part of the island. These efforts by Ukrainian forces further problems for Russian commanders who are already struggling to deploy limited and often poorly trained forces. If Ukraine can gain a foothold on this flat strategic beach and develop a beachhead from which it can advance up the peninsula, it will have taken another step in its relentless advance towards Crimea. In this regard, Russia has no idea what Ukraine will do. Therefore, if the Russian forces do not prepare to defend themselves against a range of contingencies, things will get more and more heated around the ring of fire that covers the peninsula. In this case, the Ukrainians will be able to make a serious offensive breakthrough. Ukrainian forces continue to take dramatic steps to conduct active offensive operations at Kinburn Spit and other strategic centers in the Dnipro Islands region, which is a serious factor in the plans to liberate the Crimean Peninsula. The Ukrainian forces, which have gained considerable strength from recent successful operations in these areas, have formed a River Navy assault boat group on the Dnipro River. Recently, the flagship of this Ukrainian River Navy Butcher was spotted off the coast of Dnipro. Bridge's construction began in 2019. This powerful flagship is equipped with a ZT 130mm automatic cannon, a KBA 117 30mm automatic grenade launcher, a 7.622mm machine gun, and 2 barrier AGMs. Now the Butcher has been launched for a special mission in Dnipro and will begin its mission to clear the invaders from the river. The addition of a powerful boat like Butcher to Ukraine's Dnipro River Navy, to which the United States has provided nearly $400 million of support, has greatly worried the Kremlin and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. This is because Dnipro and the island region are currently under the oppressive offensive of Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian dominance in this region, backed up by a river navy with Butcher as admiral, would be a major setback for the invaders. That is why the Russians are on high alert. Ukraine, on the other hand, has a few months to develop such capabilities to restore and control its 1991 maritime borders. To this end, securing southern Ukraine and reopening navigation from Mykolaiv, Kherson, and Okhakov will be critical. This, in turn, will contribute significantly to the restart of Ukraine's international maritime and agricultural sectors. Moreover, Control over the Kinburn, Spit, and Peninsula will provide Ukraine with access for the future occupation of the Ukrainian coast along the Sea of Azov and the Crimean Peninsula. However, time is of the essence as the Russian military is actively building fortifications to prevent any possible Ukrainian advance in these directions. In this time frame, Russia's anxiety is likely to increase much more, and it is likely to launch unplanned random attacks. Most war experts emphasize that the Russians often carry out impulsive offensives in order not to lose the Crimean Peninsula. With this in mind, at this critical time, the Ukrainians can make serious gains, both on the island of Kinburn and in Crimea. It is only important to choose the right card. The Ukrainians have already chosen the right card by blockading the peninsula, the southern and eastern parts of Dnipro. With the Ukrainians making serious strides in dominating the Black Sea and achieving all these goals, there is even a possibility that Russia will lose the war. But in this regard, the Ukrainian armed forces must be constantly supported militarily. The main reason for this is that this war is all about attrition. This means that the Ukrainian army will need important missile systems and weapons to wear down the Russian forces in critical areas such as Crimea and Dnipro. The military support of the US and the West will solve the problem, since the adverse effects of the war have greatly eroded Russia's defense industry. The Russian troops will not last long on Ukrainian territory without any military support. In short, Ukrainians need not only military support, but also a little patience to regain their freedom and expel the invaders from their country. The top generals in the Ukrainian army and military officials in critical combat missions are well aware of this. The breaking point of the Ukrainian war has been experiencing a series of death spirals in recent days. Ground and naval forces of the Russian army no longer feel safe on the peninsula, which has been the target of Ukrainian attacks for the last 2 months. Thousands of Russians fleeing Crimea after the attack by Ukraine also made the Kremlin think brooding. In fact, at the beginning of the process, the Ukrainian armed forces was leading the Kherson counteroffensive at the time of this attack. It was stated in a statement made by the United States that the Ukrainian armed forces guaranteed that the U.S. would not use weapons against Russian soil. However, U.S. senior officials declared that Crimea is Ukrainian territory and there are no restrictions on the firing of U.S. weapons into Crimea. Immediately after this statement, attacks began. One after another, the Ukrainian armed forces carried out accurate attacks on many critical targets, especially in Sevastopol, Russia's largest port in the Black Sea. Especially with the attacks of kamikaze drone armies, Crimea began to turn into a grave for the Russian army. In the latest report, Nizhnogorsky in western Crimea was attacked by kamikaze drones. Video footage of the battle between Russian air defense systems and Ukrainian drones was filmed by local residents. Initially, local telegram channels reported that an explosion occurred at Cape Valent. However, the Kremlin shared the information that the crime was a gas cylinder explosion, although Ukrainian information sources presented it as a drone attack. Later, it was learned that the work of air defense systems and explosions were recorded in the west of the peninsula. In other words, the Kremlin seems to be trying to surprise the target with its new statements. In the video footage taken by the locals, you can see how the air defense systems are working intensely just a few hundred meters away after one of the accurate shots of the Russian air defense system. The drone was shot down a moment later. However, a powerful explosion was observed, which turned out to be the result of undermining the drone's warhead. It is claimed that the destruction and loss of life were prevented as a result of another attack on Crimea. At the same time, the Russian Defense Ministry could not determine exactly which target the drone or several kamikaze planes were trying to attack, since the information about their number is still very unclear. This dawn attack, which took place just before Russia declared a ceasefire on January 5th, was the 6th explosion in Crimea. Within a week, drone armies of the Ukrainian armed forces began targeting Russian positions and military installations in Crimea every day. One day before the attack in Nizhnogorsky, explosions occurred near the Russian Belbek military airfield in Crimea. In addition, Zarkoy was attacked twice. The volume of attacks on Crimean areas increased as the Ukrainian armed forces liberated areas further south in November, including the strategic port city of Kherson, about 125 miles north of the annexed landmass in the Black Sea. On New Year's Day to the eastern region of Crimea was shaken by unexplained explosions in Ukraine's latest attack on the annexed region. According to the footage, the air defense struggled in the early hours to intercept what appeared to be missiles in Nizhny Gorskaya region of Crimea. A media outlet in Eastern Europe claimed that multiple Ukrainian missiles hit targets in Crimea. The contrast in the two reports about the same attack pushed us to examine the footage better. When we examine the images more carefully, it is clearly seen that these explosions are a clear kamikaze drone attack. The attack on Nizhny actually had a very critical strategic meaning: the attack on military bases in the region, which is very close to the entrance strait of Crimea, shows all of us the attack plan. In Kiev's mind, the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to break through the Russian defense in Crimea with similar attacks. However, the Crimean offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces will be much more difficult than any other offensive, because it should not be forgotten that Crimea has been under Russian control for about 8 years. Frankly, it's not Crimea. Kherson. It occupies a different place in the war, and many Western allies have serious concerns about escalation over Crimea. Vladimir Putin could lose in Kherson or anywhere in Ukraine and accept his losses. He could even lose and politically controlled Donbass, a part of eastern Ukraine that Russia has occupied since 2014. But Putin sees losing Crimea and surviving as president absolutely irreconcilable. He will do his best to keep Crimea in his hands. This can be a difficult order. Ukraine has already demonstrated the vulnerability of Crimea with Russia's attacks on the Black Sea Fleet and its attacks on the bridge over the Kerch Strait, which connects Russia with Crimea. It should continue to exert military pressure on the Crimea and advance in the south, in Kherson region. For now, however, it would be wise to squeeze and isolate Russian troops into the Crimea without attempting to reconquer the peninsula. This strategy will give Kiev a strong position in future negotiations with Russia and will likely persuade the Kremlin to enter such negotiations seriously. This will help maintain unity among Ukraine's Western partners who are cornered about escalation risks. More urgently, Ukraine may seek to break the land bridge to Crimea by separating Russia's forces in the south from those in the east and regaining access to the Sea of Azov. This attack has been carried out before, and the bridge became unusable for a while in the Kerch Bridge attack, which is thought to have been carried out by the Ukrainian partisan repair. Work on the bridge is still ongoing. However, the destruction of the Kerch Bridge will completely sever the peninsula's connection with Russia. Ukraine's fear of a possible Crimean attack could put the Kremlin on red alert at any moment. Putin's fears about the Crimea are increasing after the latest intelligence reports reached the Kremlin on this issue. Because the vulnerability of Crimea is a reality. The fact that Crimea has been subjected to more than 10 attacks in the last month shows not only the Kremlin, but also us how inadequate the defense systems in the region are. As we mentioned at the beginning, 6 of these attacks occurred in the last week. Russian military commanders are also increasingly concerned about Crimea's vulnerability to Ukrainian attacks. Military bases on the peninsula have previously been used to launch drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. However, in the last attacks, UAVs were deployed from the Krasnodar region of Russia. Changing the launch site is likely due to Russian concerns about the vulnerability of Crimea, but it also seems appropriate for resupply from Astrakhan, the possible destination of the weapons in Russia. War experts predict that the Ukrainian army could take control of the occupied Crimean peninsula by August 2023. This is a very serious claim because next February bears the expectation that the first break in the war will take place. Winter still hasn't fully shown its fiercest face after Christmas. A much more difficult process will await both armies. The latest satellite images of Russian-occupied Crimea show airfields, air defense zones, and ships, which defense experts say could rank as prime targets for the Ukrainian military as it seeks to weaken its forces and recapture captured territory. Crimea's importance as a launching pad for Russia's attacks on mainland Ukraine increased after Russian forces withdrew from the city of Kherson, the only regional capital they had captured since Moscow launched a large-scale invasion in February a month ago. Russian forces have suffered numerous setbacks since the invasion. Satellite images show that out of 10 active military airfields in Crimea by mid-November, the airspace in St. Croix has become the main logistics center for Russian operations in southern Ukraine. It also serves as a base for attack helicopters. For this reason, we can say that Tsarskoye is now #1 among the top 5 targets for Ukrainian attacks. Even if Putin does not want to fully believe that the Crimean attack of the Ukrainian armed forces will still take place, this attack is very close to him. And if Crimea falls, Putin will have to abdicate his throne in the Kremlin. For this reason, it can be expected that the biggest battle of the war will take place in this region.